This is my review of Star Trek Enterprise, the fourth season, and the fourth season only in this review. A bit of a background which will inform how I approach this series. I was a huge Star Trek fan when I was younger. I grew up, I was a kid in the 1980s, and like most kids in the 1980s, I got into the Star Trek movies first, which were big at the time. I remember Star Trek 3 and 4 being big when I was in elementary school, and I really got hooked on those movies. And then after I got hooked in the movies, I discovered that there was a TV show, which back at that time was still being rerun on network television fairly regularly. So once I figured out when the TV show was playing, then I was watching the TV show. In my town, it was every Saturday and Sunday evening at 6 p.m. And then during the weekdays at 11 p.m., but I wasn't allowed to stay up to 11 p.m. When I was that age. So I just caught it at 6 and 7. I was of the age where I was just barely old enough that I got really into the original series for about a year and a half before The Next Generation came out. So I considered myself already a fan of the series by the time Star Trek The Next Generation premiered on TV. And like a lot of people, I didn't take to Star Trek The Next Generation initially. I watched it for a while and then I stopped watching it, and then I came back around season 4 or 5 when it started getting good again and it was getting a positive buzz. And then Star Trek Deep Space Nine came out when I was in high school, and I was really excited about that, even though that had a bit of a rocky start, but then got better. And Star Trek Voyager came out just about the time that I was finishing high school, and I started watching that and was trying to give it a chance, but I don't know. At a certain point, I guess maybe I was just growing out of it or moving on to other things, or maybe even getting a little bit of a Star Trek fatigue, because there are quite a number of TV shows at this point. And, you know, counting the ones that were still in reruns, it added up to a lot of weekly viewing dedicated to Star Trek. So around about when I started college, I just stopped watching. And I was actually overseas teaching English in Japan when Star Trek Enterprise came out in 2001. Now, nowadays, being overseas is no great barrier to watching a TV show. Everything is streamed on the internet, either legally or illegally nowadays. Certainly, if you're interested in finding something, you can track it down. But at the time, back in 2001, that wasn't quite as true. So, and by that point, like I said, I had largely moved on from Star Trek. So I wasn't really too torn up about it, but I still had a passing interest in it because of my youthful obsession. So I read reviews of it. I read some of the news about it coming out. I had been keeping track kind of the buzz surrounding it before it came out. So I was vaguely interested in it, but only vaguely. So as somebody who had at one point been a hardcore Star Trek fan, the idea of a prequel to me just seemed like a terrible idea. I mean, for one thing, prequels are boring. I mean, why go back to an era where, I mean, the moment you do a prequel, you're kind of locking down the possibilities of where you can go. I mean, if it's not a prequel, if it's set in like the ongoing continuity, anything could happen. And that was especially maybe the appeal of watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine near the end, when they started getting into some really interesting developments. You're like, what? You know, we're become a bit more of an epic space opera with, you know, the war with the Klingons and stuff like that. You know, they could go in any direction they wanted to. You've got to keep track of the past continuity, but the present and the future continuity is open for grabs. But when you're doing a prequel, you've really kind of locked down the possibilities of where the story could go. Now, I know the appeal of Star Trek has always been, you go to a new planet. As soon as you go to a new planet, you more or less hit the reset button, because you know, anything could happen on that new planet. But I mean, if that's what you want to do, if you want to just go to a new planet and have an episode on a new planet, then why not just do that in the present continuity? Why go back to the past? There was always the fear that they were going to mess up the continuity, which is something Star Trek fans care about. Even if the writers are being really careful in looking at the continuity and saying, okay, we can't do this because of that, even then, they're still going to mess something up, because prequels always mess something up. Because anytime you have any sort of major event or anything major that happens in a prequel, then it automatically creates a minor discontinuity, because then you wonder, well, if this was such a major event at the time, then how come nobody ever referenced it in any of the subsequent times? You know, like if we had this major war set in the continuity of Star Trek Enterprise, then it becomes a little bit strange that nobody in the original series or the Next Generation or anything would ever reference back to that big conflict. And I was afraid that's what was going to happen even before the series premiered. And then sure enough, the series premiered, and you go on the internet and fans are complaining about it from day one. They got this wrong, they messed up this continuity, and then there was that one thing that they really shouldn't do, which is to introduce any major events or any major wars that would create awkwardness with the future continuity. And then sure enough, I started getting reports that they had introduced it. And beyond that, I just was reading reviews that it was boring, not interesting. These new characters are not gelling. The writers didn't know what to do with it, etc., etc. So I was by and large not interested in checking it out. I did check out a couple episodes, just out of curiosity, once they became available at my video store in Japan. And yeah, did not find them interesting. So just kind of stopped there. But eventually, through conversation, I found out through some of the other Star Trek fans at my office, or coworkers and friends, that by the time they got to season 4, it actually started getting good. Apparently season 4 is when the writers finally figured out what they wanted to do, finally figured out what would work in this series and in this setting, and then season 4 produced a number of really good episodes. It was too late at that point, because the decision to cancel it had essentially already been made. So it's a bit of a pity that they didn't figure out what they were doing until it was too late. But by season 4, they finally figured out what they were doing, is what people had told me. So armed with that information, I was living in Cambodia at the time, and Cambodia is like a heaven for pirated DVDs. They're sold everywhere, dirt cheap. You can buy almost anything you want. So, sure enough, they had Star Trek Enterprise, all 4 seasons. You could buy the DVDs there. And I decided to check it out. And I thought, I'm not going to waste my time with the early seasons. I'll just jump into season 4 and see if it's any good. And again, because there were so many DVDs available in Cambodia, you could afford to be a little bit choosy. Yeah, you almost had to be a little bit choosy, because there's so many other things competing for your attention. And after all, we're living in the golden age of television and series now. So there's no point in going back and rewatching these crappy seasons from 2001 at that point. Sorry, I know that was a lot of setup, but I wanted to make that setup clear, because I was very pleasantly surprised by season 4 of Star Trek Enterprise. It was good. It was really good. Now, whenever you're reviewing a whole season, there were some episodes and some story arcs that were better than others. So there were some mediocre episodes mixed in there in season 4. But even when it was mediocre, it was no worse than any of the other Star Trek incarnations on a bad day or on an average day. I mean, Star Trek, the original series, had some average episodes. Star Trek, The Next Generation had some average episodes. And there's some average episodes in Star Trek Enterprise Season 4. But when they're good, they are really good. The best episodes have a lot of action in it. And, I was impressed by how much action they were able to to cram in there for something that was produced on a TV budget. It was impressive. Some of those episodes were really suspenseful, and again, I was impressed at how they were able to just create that sense of suspense. Or just a couple of the episodes, I think they did a really good job of just racketing up the suspense, and I thought this is impressive for television. The pacing was really excellent. The characters were likable, and again, those previous episodes I had seen, I don't recall really liking the cast. But by the time they got around to season 4, I thought this cast was gelling together. They were working really well. And the continuity was actually all right. In fact, as somebody who grew up as a fan of the original 1960s series, or got into it at least when I was 9 years old, I thought they did a lot of nice nods back to the original series. I mean, the thing is, the original series, the continuity between the original series and the new generation of Star Trek, TNG, DS9, and Voyager, has always been a little bit awkward, because there were so many races, alien races introduced in the original series, that the subsequent incarnations just completely ignored. The Andorians, the Orions, the Gorn, the Tholians, the whole mirror universe. Actually, I think DS9 did some stuff with the mirror universe. This was after I had stopped watching DS9. I mean, Star Trek The Next Generation completely ignored that. And so all these concepts from the original series were in Star Trek Enterprise. I thought that was really cool to see. And I was impressed that the writers were taking a lot of care to make sure that it didn't break with the continuity of the original series, that the pieces were just kind of lining up perfectly to match what had been established as continuity in the original series. Now, I am told that this was not always true of the first 3 seasons, that the first 3 seasons they got really sloppy with the continuity. Somebody let me know in the comments below how true that is. I actually, to this day, have not gone back and watched the first 3 seasons because, well, why would you, if they've got that kind of reputation as not being great? I guess the reason why you might is if you're a completist. If you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to watch everything Star Trek related. And at one point in my life, that was me, but that's not me anymore. I've moved on. I no longer feel the obligation to watch everything. I'll just watch the good stuff. Thank you. And season 4 is definitely the good stuff. Except for that last episode. Now, I don't want to spend too much time talking about this because there's a lot of other people either on YouTube or on print who have already dissected all the faults of the final episode. And the faults are obvious to anyone who watches it. It doesn't require anyone to point them out to you. But yeah, the last episode is not great. And I think what happened is actually the original showrunners who had been away for the 4th season came back and they took over the last episode again. And is that right? That's my understanding at least. And they made it completely terrible. So they're trying to tie it in with Star Trek The Next Generation by having a framing device where it's the characters from Star Trek The Next Generation narrating what happens or looking back on what had happened on the final episode of Star Trek Enterprise, which I can see why they did that. It sounds like a great idea, but unfortunately it takes the focus away from the cast of Star Trek Enterprise. And it's something you can get away with if it was any other episode. But for having it be the final episode, it's unfortunate that the focus got taken away from the cast of Star Trek Enterprise. And then they go and kill off, spoilers. They go and kill off one of the characters of Star Trek Enterprise. And it's a decision which just doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, I guess somebody somewhere was thinking, okay, this is the final episode. We have to do something dramatic. Let's kill off a character. But actually, the final episode is really the last place you want to do that, because it's the final episode. So why bother? Like if this was like the middle of the season and you dramatically killed off one of the main characters, then you could still have some tragedy or pathos you could milk out of that, because then it's like, oh no, this character I really like is not going to be around for the rest of the episodes anymore. But if it's the last episode, you're like, well, it's the last episode. Okay, I guess I'm sad that he's dead, but there's no more episodes coming anyways, so why do you even bother? And then as well, there's really no time to process the fact that this character has actually died, and they don't even try to do it in the script. I mean, they wouldn't have had time anyways, but they really don't even try to process the death of this character. So even as a casual fan, somebody who only watched the 4th season, I found that annoying. But I don't want to get too hung up on that, because the point is not the very last episode. The point of this video is to say that season 4 as a whole was entertaining. And if you're like me, if you're interested in Star Trek, but you haven't checked out Star Trek Enterprise because you've heard that it's really terrible, check out season 4. I was very pleasantly surprised by it, and I think you will be too.